we know, there's this new big shift coming. For years, we have had Google sending more than 50% of free traffic to many websites. But now, as LLMs are more widely used, we're going to see a change in that. And we're going to ask our panel whether we should be blocking LLMs from accessing our content. So let me just introduce our panel to you. Tim Andrews, he's a senior technology consultant specializing in digital transformation, advising digital or C-level executives on leveraging AI to drive strategy. Lucinda Linde is a principal data scientist at Ironside and uses machine learning to solve business challenges and drive digital strategies. And Adam is the reason that I'm doing this presentation, is because he spoke about this in one of the morning briefings. And I thought, oh, there's more to this. So we're going to go through a number of questions. Our panel's going to give their opinion, and we welcome you in the audience to ask questions and provide your input. So this whole question started because recently Cloudflare allowed website owners to block AI bots with a single click. The problem is that meant you had to block your entire website. So as AI changes how content is created and used, how can we make sure the rights of the original creators are protected? Should we be blocking LLMs from our content? And what steps should we take so that creators can influence the rules? So our first question is, should you block them? And I'm going to ask our panel to talk about things like the long-term effects in businesses and for creators, to also talk about the benefits of reach and relevance versus IP, and also balancing AI exposure with data privacy and controls. So let's hear what the panelists have to say. Tim, would you like to take this on first?
Sure. You hear me okay?
Yeah. Okay.
So I think there's a second question you have to insert here right away, which is like you got a choice.
Exactly.
So right now you do, because LLMs are an emerging market. They aren't having a big impact on search results, and there's no dominant player. And so right now, this is a legitimate question that you can take on, and I think a legitimate one to discuss. There are obvious benefits to having more search engines target your site and potentially send traffic to you. And as a consumer, there's benefit to you to having available information. On the other side, if we get effectively another round of SEO and a dominant player, it doesn't feel that great, at least to me. So, and of course, there's no compensation here. At least there's no compensation models currently beyond those that are being negotiated with large publication sites. So for the typical small site, there's no notion of I'll get anything back.
Lucinda?
Yeah. So totally agree with you on that second question, because if you think about, as you said, we don't know, the percentage is not 100% that of people looking through LLM AI summaries. But at the point where it really becomes a tipping point, then it's difficult. So the binary choice of yes or no, that may evolve in the future. In other words, it may be that you can block certain things, but not others. But in terms of the benefits of blocking, you can actually, protect your proprietary information, how you, think about the world, what you think, how you present yourself to your clients, what your approach is, et cetera. And that may allow you to maintain a competitive advantage from the point of view that it's not being ingested into the LLM. It may help you with some copyright protection things, or, privacy, preserve personal data, et cetera. But the downsides are that basically, without your voice in the midst of what the LLM is summarizing, then you're going to be framed by other things. Like, you're going to be framed by what your competitors say. either implicitly or explicitly, or you'll be framed by what the AI makes up because there's not enough information. And many of the things that are good for SEO, such as having reliable or high quality links to other things, being regarded as an authoritative source, those things are all important to the LLMs and how they feed in as well. But as Tim really said, like, what's your choice, really? I mean, you're going to lose out on the traffic if you block it, but you're also going to be front run by the AIs if you don't block it. But at least your name will be in there. So I have a lot of other things to say, but I'll save those for the follow-on questions.
Well, Lucinda, I'll just make a comment that I've been very closely watching the referral traffic coming from the AIs, and it's really, really low.
Yeah.
So if we start to lose AI organic traffic, yeah, it's a huge hit. So, and Adam.
Yeah, thanks. Rosemary, if I could just share for a second, it's going to take yours off the screen.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is good morning from Melbourne, everyone, by the way. This is from the article about the Cloudflare news. And just for everyone, in case they weren't across the news yet, I just wanted to help paint the picture of the landscape we're looking at. So this is a graph of the number of requests per day to Cloudflare sites. And Cloudflare does a lot of hosting of websites to help manage the high demands of traffic to those websites. And the top three there you can see on the list, it's ByteSpider, which is basically the ChatGPT equivalent out of China, and then Amazon Bot and Claude Bot, which obviously are all scraping this for large language model training purposes. And it until I saw this graph, I wasn't even really aware of, I guess, the breadth and the depth of the problem. So I just wanted to bring that up as a point of reference for the conversation. But the other thing I wanted to, I guess, add here was a layer of distinction. You can put your slides back up when you want, though, as well. No, thanks. Between the bots that are going to websites because they want to train on this data and they want to use the information to build models versus the bots that are going to your website because they are approaching the new search. And they want to actually present your information in terms of discoverability to people who are chatting with a Perplexity or a Search GPT and trying to get to your website, right? I mean, and I think that's really the difference between whether are you being used by these bots so that they can profit and they can train new models, or is there at least some sort of symbiosis, right? Where these bots, they may be benefiting because people are going to them because they have access to all this information, but they're at least feeding the users through to the websites that have that content where there's at least a benefit to presenting and exposing your data. So it doesn't really answer the question. Frankly, you've been sharing this and we've been exploring it for 2 weeks, and I still wish there were a yes or no. I keep looking at that first question, like, should we be blocking these things? And it's like, man, it depends, right? It depends not only on is this something you're doing because you're protecting your IP from inference, from their training, or is it that you want to expose your information so that you can actually have discoverability? And we're going to need more sophisticated tools so that we can drive that wedge, whether it's like CAPTCHA type devices or paywalls. There are some options, but unfortunately, the more friction you put for the robots, the more friction you're putting for your users as well. So it's a great topic. I'm happy to be here, but that's exactly it. When there is no cut and dry answer, it's always a spicy debate.
So, Adam, then what kind of publicly available data would you say people would want to protect and not have the LLM index? If it's
public available, that's basically you think about things like Reddit and YouTube, right? That's all publicly available data, but in many ways that's it's personal IP. So I think it's a big gray area. I don't think it's really clear exactly. Just because it's in the public domain doesn't mean necessarily someone should be able to profit from it. But right, we've been we've been talking about this problem since the early search engines and monetization of other people's content. So that's not really a new debate, I guess. In this way, it's just sort of a new threat vector on that spectrum.
Right, right. All right, our next question. So as AI grows, so does the risk of a few companies dominating the landscape. And Tim, you brought this up to me in the last few weeks. So how do we keep the field open and fair while protecting creators' rights? And
oh, that's a great one. And yeah, I wish I had an answer. I think the answer to that has to be king for a day, because you probably need legal protection. And I think the point I was making in our internal debate was copyright and intellectual property has been, the idea of it's been around since the Constitution. It's literally in the Constitution. But the idea of it and the spirit of it is always a negotiation, depending upon the technology. And the technology changes things dramatically. So the invention of electronic transmission of data in the 1800s through the telegraph radically changed how quickly information could be disseminated. And the invention of movies and things like that radically changed the idea of what was intellectual property, what needed to be protected for how long. So there's always some negotiation, and it's settled either through legal rules, that is through rulemaking from agencies of the government, or literally through law. And we probably need something like that, because this has completely changed the dynamic again. And we need somebody to say, what's a reasonable negotiation between the creators, the customers, the consumers of that creation, and the distributors, effectively, at the LLMs, the intermediaries who control this stuff. And of course, the intermediaries in the early days love this, because it's an enormous advantage to them to take advantage of the old rules and simply run roughshod over any IP they feel like. And that is the law of the land today. I think the fair use rule is pretty strong, and it's going to be, I don't see how creators are going to get around that. But if it destroys the ability for creators to make any money, then it'll have an enormous impact that'll basically turn the gun back at the very people who want this stuff. So it's a difficult problem, and I don't have a solution.
Lucinda.
Yeah, so it's all of these, every one of these questions is like, oh man. So how do you deal with this? So avoiding market monopolies and sharing fair and competitive, I'm just going to list a couple of ideas. And these are, unfortunately, like big things would have to happen. One of them is really robust antitrust enforcement. And we're seeing that right now. But however, each one of those battles just takes so much work, because these monopolies have a lot of resources behind them. And it's probably not until people are super angry and you get a president like Theodore Roosevelt to bust the trust and do something like the Act of 1933, that those types of legislative enforcements, and then plus the actual enforcement of like, no, that you can't do that combination. Another part of it is open standards and interoperability. So that the industry could decide to, regulate itself and say, we're going to have open standards. We're going to make it so that there is competition, so that we can, have this will actually optimize how fast the industry can grow and advance. That really depends on the mindset of the people, of the players in there. And we've already seen that multiple of these players are closed systems, and they are not going to do that. Another one is just intellectual property reform, updating patent laws and copyright laws. You're talking about fair use, but then there's like also, okay, when something is a copy and people are making money off of it, how close is too close, right? For it to be, something that people can go after. So that's another part of it. And then transparency as well. So these are just a few ideas. So in other words, how are these models? What's the data sources for these models, in addition to the weights, which are at least published with the open systems, but they're not published, with the closed systems. Transparency and interpretability, so that people can understand it more. Understand, that neural networks don't necessarily have that, but this type of instrumentation is starting to be built in. But those are a few ideas to help get a more fair and open ecosystem. And some of that, is for, enforcement. Another of it, would be if the industry decided to do that and regulate itself.
Adam, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I've just put a link in the chat. It's to an organization called C2PA, which I hadn't heard of until just last week, but it's the Coalition for the Content, Provenance, and Authenticity. And this is backed by Adobe, BBC, Google, Intel, Microsoft, OpenAI, Sony. And it's really about creating a technical standard that allows publishers, creators, and consumers the ability to trace the origin of different types of media. Think of it sort of like a digital watermark, right? But such that even as that content then gets trained into models, there would be a way to identify and detect where this had originally come from. So it's just one example of what Lucinda's talking about, right? Both the regulatory as well as the technology side just need to mature so that we have better tools and standards and some teeth, hopefully, in terms of compliance. Because at the moment, people can just sort of ignore the rules, and there's very little that can be done on the enforcement side. But the technology is evolving as well, and I think between things like C2PA as well as blockchain, which is a way to certify that a piece of content was effectively timestamped. You can prove when you generated it in a secure and immutable way. The technology will come. At least I'm hopeful that it'll come that can help protect the creators' rights.
I've had to use archive.org many times when people steal my content to show that I was the original creator of it. So yes, I can see that would be really valuable. Now, Kevin, you had your hand up. Did you get a question answered? Okay, Jim.
Yes, I think there's perhaps a free market solution to at least part of this problem. And that is, I use various AI models every day, and it probably saves me hours a day. And one of the things that I run into, though, constantly is particularly these models that have real-time internet access, they're constantly hallucinating. And so what I am always having to do is to tell them to perform an online search to verify their results, which sometimes they will do, sometimes they won't. And also, I often need links in order to verify the information. Now, sometimes they can provide the links, sometimes they're hallucinatory links, sometimes they just say, no, I don't have any links for you. So I'll then have to go and do like a Google search. So if you look at places like Perplexity, they have their own search engine, and they can, if they want to, they can go out and verify after the fact, after the response, or in the process of generating the response, they can verify whether there's information on the web that supports or that at least involves what they're talking about. And so I think what you could do is you could have large language models, for example, that give you access to information that's on the web, but that automatically provide you with these links to those sources so that you can verify the results. And then you could have something on the other end for the websites that provide this information, whereby they can allow bots that provide the links and block the bots that don't. And then that gives you a way to regulate who's getting your information. Also, if a big search provider, for example, runs an LLM that digests websites and doesn't give you these links, then if those websites depend on that traffic to stay alive, then that service is just not going to be able to continue to be viable because they're going to drive their sources of information out of business. So I think perhaps there is a free market mechanism that could be utilized to greatly alleviate some of these problems.
Thank you, Jim. Kevin, I've seen your hand up twice. So
yeah, I was on mute when I was trying to answer. Well, actually, I was it was kind of going back to the earlier question on whether or not you should block the LLMs. And I think one of the important things is if you have a Wikipedia page that you have no control over on the information about your company, then that's you're going to be at a disadvantage if they're pulling information off of Wikipedia. You actually have control over your own website and your corporate messaging. The one thing that is I'd be, against having your information scraped is if you have a paywall, such as a newspaper or a blog that some of your subscribers pay for, and if they're scraping that for somehow they're getting through that, then obviously, that's not what you want.
Well, didn't that happen actually with OpenAI last year? And that's why they had to take down the search function, the browsing with Bing, was because it was getting behind the paywall?
Well, I think the New York Times is suing them for that. I don't know where that stands right now, but that kind of information is, that's definitely, going to be in the courts.
Right. All right. So question 3. So AI has completely changed how we find information and what's happening to content discovery if we block AIs. And so how is that going to shape up with OpenAI's new Search GPT? And Bob Macklin, who's not on the call, he shared yesterday with me some of screenshots from that interface. He's one of the 10,000 people that got in. So what do you are any of you using being given access to Search GPT yet? And what do you feel about it? Adam? No, you don't have it? Not fast enough? Okay. Tim, did you get access?
I haven't yet that I'm aware of. No, I mean, they just sort of spring it on you. They don't generally let you know, so you have to keep checking.
Right.
But last time I checked, I did not have it.
So what I saw was that it gives you all of the search links, so you can go to those links. In the prompt that I gave to Bob, it was all results. All the top results were Wikipedia, which wasn't very useful. But Lucinda, have you tried this or heard any comment on that?
No, I did notice that Alden put up a post on Sunday because Judah Phillips had gotten access to it, and so he looked at some of the access. I mean, it looked very, the screenshots that were shown were the very kind of typical, right? It's like you ask a question, it has a whole bunch of different numbered responses with the citations in for some of them. So yeah, I mean, it looked reasonable in terms of what the answers were. So, but I actually did want to get back to the question here about question 3. Like what's lost, right? So basically, if everybody blocks their websites, then the search engines don't have anything to search on. But if the search engines ignore everything and they just take the content and they don't give any either revenue sharing like Perplexity is proposing to do, or they don't and they don't do the traffic, then they're going to kill the businesses. So the winner take all attitude in this is going to have basically a very poor ecosystem, and that there's really got to be some sharing in order to build the community, as well as respecting the proprietary information is all I can say. So
okay, thank you. So many AI systems have already indexed the web. So is it too late to close the door? And what happens to your content that's out there if you all of a sudden now close the door? It's still in the LLM, presumably, so you could have very outdated content if you go, a year ahead. So is it too late to restrict data?
Yeah, I think, there is probably another distinction in the type of data because, again, we're sort of painting a broad brush because everything is so horizontal here. There's a difference because somebody mentioned, corporate data, like your corporate website versus Wikipedia, right? So I think there are two issues. For things like corporate data or your own site, your business, right? You kind of want that. That's what you want to be indexed because that's what you want to be out there. When we were, I think we're all sort of probably implicitly, and we should be explicitly saying the kind of data that is more complicated is data that you've created. Adam used the term personal creation or personal IP, whether it's corporate IP or personal IP. That kind of data gets more complicated if you don't have any compensation for it. Because right now, the arrangement is nobody can really take that away from you all that easily and then just regurgitate it a million times. That's what the technology changes. So you can write a white paper and somebody can download the white paper, but you can make them give you your email. There are various ways that the friction is high enough that it doesn't end up just being available to everybody. But again, my poster child example is LinkedIn, which has these shared articles that they invite you to write as an expert. Clear what they're doing. They're training an LLM so that they don't need you, right? And that seems really predatory to me at the very least. So those kind of things are more complicated. So I think the basic information retrieval, we sort of want to be indexed. We don't want to hide that. The only challenge there is that SEO has now led to dwell time and these just crazy, there's a whole other discussion about why do we let this whole environment exist? Because it's not a great one, but it does, and we're kind of stuck in it now. And the SEO model now has Google basically capturing lots of web information that you provide as a service and putting it on their search result rather than on your site. And so basically robbing you of traffic. And the question is, does that happen even with your primary information, stuff you would normally give away? And that's yet, we don't know because this is a new market, but that's a thing that if the model obtains that we have right now, which is I want you on my site because that's how I get the most money, then the LLMs are going to have the same incentive that Google does to take your everything out of your site that they can. And yes, they will drive you out of business, but they don't seem smart enough to not do that right now. So it's not clear that they will be smart enough not to do that in the future.
But to me, the question of should you block it, I mean, for corporate websites, you don't want to do that, especially in light of Search GPT, because you want your results to be returned.
Exactly.
You want, well, that again, depends which part of the results, right? So I think the paywall is pretty clear. If you're charging people money to get out something and suddenly it's available for free, that's a problem, okay? So that one seems pretty cut and dry. The other one is a lot of people put a lot of valuable services on their site because in the current negotiation of IP, it's pretty hard to really take those services and simply take them away and make them available to somebody else without payment. The LLMs change that dynamic. And so do you have to think harder about the kinds of services and content you make available publicly on your website? Because if it's suddenly available on Perplexity for nothing, and part of the value of your website is providing that service on your website, so people go there and spend time and maybe bump into other things that are more valuable for you as well, you lose that, right?
Right.
I think another aspect as well is it's, when you talk about it being too late, these models are being updated constantly, right? So, or reasonably frequently. So, if you decided to block from, say, January of 2024 onward, then your things, your information, your authoritativeness, your presence in the marketplace is now not represented kind of going forward from whatever the update of the model is. I mean, there may be some things, there may be some blend of, older material versus current material, but over time, if you continue to block, then basically your presence is going to fade away. And other people will be able to say things about your company, or the LLM will make things up if somebody asks a direct question about it. So yeah, I mean, it's really, yeah, you have to be careful about what you put on the website, and think that through as well.
Yeah, thank you. So what about the technical hurdles in bot detection and blocking only what we want? Because I've also read that not all the LLMs will honor robots.txt files.
Well, that's the main reason I think Cloudflare released their product, is because Perplexity most notably has gotten the most bad press about it recently. I don't know if they're the only, I don't even know the truth of it, so I don't want to attribute that I understand this in detail. But the reporting on Perplexity has been that they completely ignore this. And again, right now it's a like voluntary protocol, right? You just make a list and say, I don't want these robots on my site, and the robots have to agree. There's nothing preventing them from doing it, and apparently they just started doing it and ignoring this, please stay off my property sign. And so Cloudflare invented this thing that, because they're a security firm, so they're in the business of blocking people from your website, that figures out how to block these things. So I think that is why they came up with it. It's a pretty crude tool right now, but that clearly was why they came up with it, because you can't right now prevent them in any straightforward way, the way you used to. So, a lot of the internet is pretty fragile like this, because it was built on top of open protocols designed in public that are open source, and people just agree to abide by the protocols. But that's an agreement, and if people just stop agreeing, it falls apart pretty quick.
I didn't know that. Adam, did you have a comment to add to that?
Just in terms of how we differentiate them, Cloudflare's doing a little bit of that. Like, how do you even know it's a bot in the first place? But then how do you figure out if it's a good, and I use the air quotes, good bot or a bad bot? And some of that can be done, not unironically, but even using AI in the machine learning sense, right? In terms of heat maps, behavioral analysis, the speed at which the cursor moves around the screen, it's very clear whether this is script driven versus being a human. So there are at least technical ways to identify what a bot is, and that's part of what Cloudflare is doing, right? They have a list of known offenders, whether that's in terms of the global address, the IP that's being used to access them, being from a certain source, or in terms of behavioral analysis. But then the more refined question, which I think will come with time, is what's a good bot and what's a bad bot, right? And so how do you allow through the ones that are beneficial for indexing or discoverability? Even things like performance checks for your website. There are bots that make sure that you have uptime and make sure that your pages are responsive. And if we just cut them all out, then we're going to be losing a lot of important capabilities like SEO as well. So you can't. It's great that they've at least, I think of it like the field medic, right? That's just trying to stop the bleeding at this point. They've put a big old patch on the problem, but obviously there are downsides to that as well. And with time and refinement, we'll be able to get the patient back to the emergent care and do a little more sophisticated cleanup on the problem.
Yeah, still early days. John, you have a question?
No, I was just going to talk about the questions in front of us here, the beneficial and harmful. I don't know if you want to head there. Just let me know.
Yeah, yes, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting. I think it was Michael Novak knows, beneficial and harmful, I think, are hard things to define. I would also argue that because the economies of scale, when I look at something like search, that's a very, very naturally concentrated model, right? Bigger is always better. It's like, they're has natural economies of scale. It's not clear to me that large language models have natural economies of scale. And so what I think that means is that we're going to have a much more varied set of corporations. And someone in the commentary also said that, the people are going to tune their content. So I think I think the balance of power between the corporations and other intermediaries and the mega companies is actually going to be not as one-sided. And so beneficial and harmful are going to get very interesting because I think there's going to be much more, fighting back, if you will, using intelligence that'll be at scale for their purpose or their geography or their domain. And I think that this whole conversation about what's good and bad is going to be much more active in the marketplace, I think.
So John, I think you bring up a really good point about the fact that inference-based model is really different than software-based models. Basically, with software-based models, the N+1, person, it really costs nothing from an incremental basis. However, for AI, the N+1 actually has a cost of goods sold, which is the cost of inference. So it's really much more like a manufacturing model. And as you say, the sort of software scaling models may not apply because if you're doing AI and inference, there is a cost to that, and that is different than the almost zero cost of the millionth and first person who's using software compared to the million before that. So I think that's important. I do think, like, for the beneficial and harmful bots, as Adam brought up, there are behavioral ways to do that. That ends up being a cat and mouse game, an arms race of, you get some sophisticated bot, it's got some tactics, people catch on to what those tactics and behaviors are, then you go over to, then there are countermeasures. So it ends up being a cat and mouse game, much in the way that search has become a cat and mouse game between the algorithms that are doing the indexing, et cetera, and the publisher's tactics and the marketer's tactics.
Absolutely. And Rosemary, I would like to try to save,
Yes,
5
we
to
can stop.
7 or so minutes. So
No, that's fine. Adam predicted I wouldn't get through all my questions, so I think this is a good time to wrap it up and turn it over to you. So I'll stop.
John, can I sneak in one more provocative statement?
yes, absolutely. You take another 5
Here's
minutes.
to me, the bigger issue, and the reason I got exercised, about the IP rights. This is an information retrieval system, okay? And you can think of it in some ways as analogous to a road system. So once there is more than one way but to get to something, and there are a lot of roads and a lot of places to go, there are choke points. And so once there is more books than you can read in a lifetime, there's already choke points. And there's too much, and so people write great novels and never get read because they can't rise above the noise. Same problem here. There's already so many websites. There's no way to even begin to rise above the fray without several layers of information retrieval, of which search engine has become the most prominent. And the question is, should somebody own that? Because that is a choke point. That is a complete monopoly. Okay. And we don't let people used to own roads, and it was a real problem because of this. You couldn't get from point A to point B if you weren't careful. And so there's a real issue here, and a real question needs to be thought through of, should we allow a private entity to own a choke point to information where they have complete control over what gets returned?
All right, so I'm gonna turn it over to you, John, to wrap
Sure.
up.
Well, Tim, that was a perfect kickoff for the question I was going to throw out to people, which is, what do you think of this new Google decision that says Google's a monopoly? And I have a very pointed question on that. Do people first agree with that? I happen to agree with that. And then the second question I have is, do you think they should break Google up? What do folks think?
I actually do think they should break Google up because, one of the things that John D. Rockefeller said when they broke up Standard Oil was, buy Standard Oil stock, because when it gets broken up, the value of all of the things together is going to be way more than what the integrated thing is, because, I think, as we later saw, now you've got competition, and that really fuels a lot of the innovation. But I do think they should be broken up. The only problem is that with the telcos, they did that in the 80s, right? Because AT&T was too big. They broke it up into the 5 regional bells. Over the next couple of decades, basically they all recombined back. And that was really as a result of, the FTC saying, yeah, sure, go ahead and do that. But yeah, I do think they should be broken up. I think the competition would be good. I think a lot of the vertical integration that's been going on, like Amazon and the vertical integration there, ought to be broken up as well.
Yeah, I mean, it depends how you define monopoly, but 96% of the market, it's pretty hard to say that's not a monopoly in a practical sense. And the forces that they employ are even more monopolistic. Like you can't not do SEO. And not only can you not do SEO, you have to do it quite specifically to Google. In fact, Google makes it hard for you to do SEO for other search engines. So they're predatory as well as monopolistic. So classic behaviors. Breaking them up is the classic approach. You must know Brian Arthur, and Brian's an old colleague, and I would ask Brian Arthur that question as to like what to do about it, because he was the guy who really invented increasing returns and wrote about Microsoft early on, which they didn't break up ultimately, and I think they should have. So yeah.
Yeah, John, I completely agree with the breaking up. And this topic is a little close to my heart because my previous company was pretty much decimated by Google's monopoly. And the ways they did it was just like so monopolistic. They could go into their terms and conditions and add whatever they want, where they prevent competitors from competing. They owned pretty much the entire ecosystem. Like when you look at advertisements, Google owns AdWords. They own the biggest site on the internet, YouTube. They own every piece of glue that runs advertising. They own the RTB exchanges. They own the demand exchanges. They own if you draw a picture, it's literally the entire slide is owned by Google. And there is no way that anybody can compete with that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I've just started to read the 286-page judgment. And yes, they go into all these points about predatory behavior, monopolistic practices, restraint of trade. It's a pretty comprehensive judgment against these characters. Not that I'm an expert in antitrust law, but yeah, interesting. So what other people think? I mean, because I happen to think if they win with Google, who's next in the crosshairs? Facebook? I mean, I think you could. Facebook's pretty aggressive, so what do people think? Alexander, let's get you in here.
Yeah, sure. I was just going to say echo your sentiments here is if this goes through, I think that you're going to kind of see a domino effect amongst like all the big tech companies, because think about all these different companies that have entire silos and kind of divisions that could operate on themselves. I mean, AWS and Amazon. I mean, even just looking at even a company that I love, Apple, their AirPods business rivals a lot of SaaS businesses. So it's going to be like a domino effect if this does actually go through, because all of these entities have large silos of their actual main business that could operate on their own. And that's kind of the definition of having like monopolistic practices.
All right, Jim.
Yeah, I think an interesting aspect of all this is these large companies like Google and Meta, for example, they are creating fabulous language models that will run on edge devices like phones and laptops and so forth. So in a sense, they're creating some of the very factors that could be their own undoing. And so I think we're in a very high state of flux right now with regards to all these technologies. And I think we're just about to see a move to edge computing for AI. And that may very well rejigger the balance between a lot of these things.
Very interesting. So kind of the termites coming up underneath and eating their own parents, if you will.
Yes.
Capabilities. Yeah, I happen to agree strongly with that, Jim, because I think that we don't know what the economics of knowledge are, right? I mean, what are how big, think of it this way, how big a pool of data and expertise do you need to dominate a quote unquote category, and what is a category in knowledge? Is it lawnmowers? Is it small engine repair? Is it, 4 or 5 agents that have to do with blades and grass handling and oil. You know what I mean? Like, how does that knowledge naturally or unnaturally, competitively shake out? Who knows? We don't know yet.
Right. In fact, if you look at Llama 3.1, it is really an incredible advance. One of the large limiting factors in the use of large language models, at least at the edge, has been the limited context window lengths. And Llama 3.1 expands that to 128K tokens, which gives you an awful lot of room to work with. And even the large models, I've done a lot of work with the 8 billion parameter version of Llama 3.1. They are remarkably smart. And so there is some amazing capability that we're right on the verge of beginning to use.
I'm very grateful for the fact that Facebook is putting out large language models and doing all this research and putting it out there that are open source or relatively open source. So I'm hoping that this can be the basis for some of this other competition. There could be a shifting of the ground. It could all consolidate that back to the same players. But I think history will show us that the dominant players in one era, when the technology shifts, it's probably going to be different dominant players in another era. But we don't know who those are. Those companies may be just emerging now, and we don't know what those names are.
Yeah, I think that a very interesting aspect of this is that Apple just happens to have, because they're ARM licensed Apple Silicon architecture, they happen to have a fabulous architecture for running inferencing on models. They use a unified memory architecture, which, on the Windows side, you have to use a GPU for inferencing and use video RAM. But with the Apple unified memory architecture, you have the whole RAM space to work with for each of the processors. And not only that, but they have the Apple Neural Engine, which is fabulous for referencing because it in benchmarks that I've seen, it's 7 to 8 times faster than the GPU in running the matrix type calculations that are needed for inferencing. Plus, it requires a lot less power. So I think Apple doesn't really even need to invest that much money because all of this stuff can be naturally run on their architectures.
That's amazing. All right. Well, we're coming up. Thank you, Jim. I think that's incredibly important. I'd like to just add one thing. A lot of people worry about where's the data going to come from. I would submit to you that right now, the way we're looking at data is the same way that when I was a kid, there was the Club of Rome that said we've reached peak oil. That was in the 1970s. I think we're going to find whole new veins of data. For example, I'm aware of a launch that's going to happen later this month that is going to happen in a developing country that's going to launch a dock in a box on the phone to hundreds of millions of people. And it's going to be very interesting to see what happens when that happens, if it works, and what that data access looks like, and it's on the device, to your point, Jim. All right. Thank you, everybody. Rosemary, Adam, Tim, Lucinda, and I'm forgetting someone. Who was the last person? Forgetting someone? No? Yes? All right.
That was it.
Pardon me?
That was all of us. Okay,
great. Well, thank you all so much for this wonderful interaction. Look forward to seeing you all next week. And we will send you out the content. And from GAI Insights to Learning Lab, thanks all for helping us get better every day. Bye-bye now.